I'm Gareth Davies here in the UK, and I'm talking to my big old pal, Dan Rafael, who's got a new cap on these days. It's show 13 of our lockdown boxing chats, and we're going to answer your questions today. Dan, how are you?
I'm good. I always enjoy the questions. We got a lot of people that hit us up on social media. They post their questions sometimes on the bottom in the comment sections of the previous videos that we've done, and I like seeing them. It's always fun to do. It's like, as we've discussed, it's like my Friday Fight Freak chat come to life in a video format.
Yeah, correct. And I love those. Ross Thompson asks, "Hey Gareth, Dan, I was wondering if these will continue after the lockdown eases further. Really enjoying. What's your take, Dan?"
You know, listen, as long as we have time to do them and we're still having a good time and people are watching them, why not, right?
The big problem we've got is when we're actually together at a venue, because I only want to do them on Zoom. Nice one from James Germain. Two best journos in boxing without an agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Boss says, great episode, the last one we did. Be good to get Frotch on. We'll get Frotchy on.
You know, it's funny you say about Frotch. They just, on Showtime, last night, they just replayed the Super 6 final to unify the super middleweight belts that he had against Andre Ward. And I hadn't seen that fight in a long time. Obviously, I was there in Atlantic City when it happened.
Me too, yeah.
But I didn't watch the whole fight last night. I didn't pick it up till about the seventh round. But I watched the rest of the fight. And on the night of the fight, obviously, Andre Ward, even not the night of the fight, he clearly was the winner of the fight. But in rewatching it last night, at least the second half of the match, I forgot that Carl actually gave a very good account of himself in the second half of the fight, even though
naturally he went after it.
He really did go after. Now, Andre was dealing with an injury to his hand, or I forget what it was, a shoulder, some sort of injury that he came into the fight with. But although Andre, did a masterful job to win, I forgot that Carl had put up a much better fight in that second half than I had recalled off the top of my head. So it was good to see that again. Like I said, I hadn't watched a long time. I believe both of them are going to be in the Hall of Fame someday. Ward will probably be elected this coming year because he'll be on the ballot for the first time because he's now meets the eligibility. And Carl, I think also should make it. It's hard right now because don't
let them both go there together. We'll never hear the end of it.
Well, whether they're together or not, Andre is a cinch for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Deserves it with what he did. And I think Carl Froch, fought of that time frame in the super middleweight division. He fought everybody. I mean, he fought like about 7 or 8 or 9 fights in a row. With maybe only one sort of softest touch, maybe, the Yusuf Mack fight was like kind of a smallish kind of fight, but everybody else at that time frame, whether he was fighting against Mikkel Kessler twice or Ward, he fought Jean Pascal. I mean, he fought so many quality guys. It's just ridiculous.
But listen, he fought, there was something like 13 world title fights in a row. 2 Mikkel Kesslers, Arthur Abraham, Andre Ward, if you count all those Super Sixes fights as well,
he had the incredible comeback knockout against Jermaine Taylor, which was
Glenn Johnson, all of them.
Right?
Jermaine Taylor comeback 14 seconds ago. He had the Jean Pascal fight in 2008. Go and watch that back.
I have watched that. That was
unbelievable.
That was a tremendous battle. I mean, and I actually give Pascal a lot of credit because that was a fight where Pascal fought half the fight with a messed up, dislocated shoulder. He showed.
Hey! For that fight, Carl went into it with broken ribs and a perforated eardrum.
Yeah, well, Carl fought.
John Duck says, Gareth, please encourage Dan to lose some weight for the good of his health. No, John, I love every acre of him. You're meant to laugh there, Dan.
Ha.
Because I love every bit of you. Right. So, Xavier Lamekis says, great show. Wow, this is a good one, Dan. You'll love this.
Okay.
What would have been the outcome of Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe? They'd have had to have more than one fight, wouldn't they?
Well, look, I mean, that was obviously the fight that should have happened when it didn't, because Riddick Bowe threw the WBC title in the trash can. And even though it was a mandated fight, Lennox Lewis was his mandatory. But I believe very strongly that Lennox Lewis, at any time in their professional careers, would have won that fight. He stopped Riddick Bowe in the Olympic Games to win the gold medal. I know it's amateurs, it's different, but in the heavyweight division, it's not that much of a difference in my mind. And because they're still big guys hitting each other hard. And I just feel like Lennox, overall, he was the hungrier fighter from the standpoint of, having the desire to be great. He had the speed, he had the skills, he had the power, he had the motivation, he had the conditioning. And Riddick Bowe, although Riddick, on his best night, if he could have gotten himself up and in the kind of condition he did when he fought Evander Holyfield, certainly in the first fight when he won the title, that Riddick Bowe maybe could have beaten any heavyweight who ever lived. But he only got in that kind of shape one time in his whole entire career. And, I think Lennox Lewis did much, not that Lennox came in perfect shape every fight. He would have been up for that fight. He didn't like Bowe. Bowe didn't like him, but I think Lennox really had a severe distaste for Riddick. And I just feel like he would have had more of everything in that fight, and he would have beat him.
I agree, and I think Lewis wins late by stoppage. I think
it would have been a stoppage also.
Yeah, but eighth round onwards, because I think mentally, I remember speaking to Lennox about this, it was the Seoul Olympics, wasn't it? 98, 88. Yeah, it was the Seoul Olympics he won, wasn't it? It was the Seoul. Yeah.
It was absolutely the Seoul Olympics. Lennox was Olympic Games, but he got the gold.
Saying he knew he had Bowe beaten mentally for the future. That's what he delighted in that victory as well. He knew he was going to meet this guy down the line. And when they spoke, he knew he had him beaten mentally. It's a fantastic story.
It pisses me off to this day that they didn't fight. And I'm going to tell
you,
when we were in Los Angeles, when Tyson Fury had the first fight with Deontay Wilder, you remember this, they did that they did that heavyweight
array of heavyweights, yeah.
So Riddick was part of that, and Lennox was part of that. And I remember I ran into Riddick in the lobby of the hotel the night before that. He came into the hotel on Friday night. The round table that they did was on the Saturday afternoon prior to the, going to the Staples Center for the event. And so I was talking to Riddick for a few minutes, and he was like, well, who else is here? So I told him some of the names of the guys that were there. And when I mentioned Lennox Lewis, he got all angry. He's like, I want to kick his ass.
Evander Holyfield was there as well.
Yeah. But I said to Riddick, I said,
Buster Douglas was there.
Yeah. But I said to Riddick, Riddick, it's 30 years ago. You're still carrying a grudge. And he was like, he wanted to.
Hey, Dan, not only that, when they got up on stage, Lennox shoved into the middle of them all, and he pushed Riddick on stage. Do you remember?
I do.
It was a bit of an altercation, and Riddick was very upset afterwards about it.
They had to get somebody to stand between them on the stage.
Right. I think it was a 26-stone Buster Douglas.
I don't remember who was between them, but the point is, this is a celebration of great heavyweights. Your situation was 30 years ago. You should have settled it in the ring, and carrying a grudge, 3 decades later. But,
Marco Figoni, we've got 6 more questions to get through, and I want to whip through them.
Okay, let's do it.
Who's the best Mexican fighter of all time, and does Canelo get in the all-time greats yet? That's from Marco Figoni.
Well, I would say that, Canelo is not there yet, but he's got a chance to certainly win it. I think already he's among the top Mexicans of all time.
Top 20, yeah.
Certainly the top, I think even the top 10 at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, but let's see how far he's got to go yet.
But he's already got enough on the resume, in my mind, to make that top 10 list.
I don't disagree with you.
Number one is, I'd take the conventional wisdom, which is most people, and I would tend to agree, is Julio Cesar Chavez, Sr., obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was the most popular. He was the most accomplished. He beat so many top names. And, you ask any Mexican fighter post Chavez, and you ask them who their idol was, they'll all tell you it's Chavez. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And even guys that are on that list, like a Marco Antonio Barrera, a Juan Manuel Marquez, and Eric Morales, pick a Mexican, and they'll tell you that Chavez was the guy that they wanted to be like. And so I think that there's no question. Chavez Sr. is the number one Mexican, but you, like the guys I just mentioned, you have, Salvador Sanchez, people like to talk about.
Let me add some more to yours.
Yeah, add some more.
So I made a list earlier. As you say, Salvador Sanchez could creep in just behind. I don't disagree with you on Julio Cesar Chavez. Ricardo Lopez, Ruben Olivares, Carlos Zarate, Vicente Salvidar, Oscar De La Hoya.
Well, we would count Oscar as an American because
I agree. But
I mean, it's not to tell anybody what their Oscar was Mexican American. Most people don't. I'm not to say he's not Mexican because clearly his family is from there. It's kind of like the situation with Andy Ruiz. He says he's Mexican. If they believe they're Mexican, that's fine. But when you make the list of the country's all-time greats, Oscar would probably, by the historians that make those lists, like us, we would probably not include Oscar because even though he's Mexican heritage, he's an American fighter, born and bred in the United States,
Yeah.
fought in the United States in the Olympic Games. So, but yes, Oscar, whatever nationality he was, he's a Hall of Famer and a great fighter.
There's loads of them, of course, and we've mentioned about 12 or 13 then. Marco Fagoni, if you watch this episode, who do you think was the greatest Mexican?
You agree that it's Chavez, though, by the way?
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
Totally. Imagine 134,000 at the Azteca Stadium covering those fights. Can you imagine?
Against Haugen.
Yeah, again. Could you imagine? Okay.
I wasn't there for that, but I've talked.
No, we're too young.
I was, still in. I think I was just graduated from college at that.
Yeah.
But I've talked to people that were there covering that fight, that worked on that broadcast, that were there to cover it, and they just say that the spectacle was something they'd never seen. Now,
Dan, I think it's like those events we never forget, like Joshua against Klitschko with 90,000 at Wembley Stadium on a bar.
Okay, now add 40,000 to that total.
But it's that kind of shape of crowd. How you arrive 10 hours before the event, how you see the hordes coming in, how you look around you and enjoy the hubbub between fights, how you have to walk 10 minutes to the media room, just all the things about it. And then that moment, the ring walks, which are longer and more explosive and more amazing than anything you ever witnessed, because let's be honest, when we're in the small arenas and Las Vegas and Los Angeles and those places, compared to these huge stadiums, the small arenas, it's only a 4 or 5 minute walk to the ring for the fighters. Mm-hmm. There, it's doubled or trebled.
I will say this:
the screens are bigger. Everything.
I hope before it's all said and done, and I know it's hard because of the financial considerations, but I do hope that while he's still a top level fighter, that at some point Canelo Alvarez has that kind of fight against somebody in Mexico City in that giant stadium, and maybe try to break the record that Chavez set in terms of the attendance, but has one of those kind of spectacle fights. Now, he's done it in terms of selling out and having huge fights in the big arenas in Las Vegas. He's done it having, a fight with Liam Smith in Cowboy Stadium, which drew over 50,000. But in Mexico, that would be a huge, huge spectacle if Canelo could have a big-time fight there.
I agree completely, and I would like to see a bit more ambition from them in that way. It's about finding the right opponent. We've got 5 questions from Untouchable. Thank you for these 5 questions. Dan, I'm going to ask you a time limit on the answers for these, all right? Because they're all big questions.
I'll try to make it quick.
Right, first one. Who in the history of boxing could beat a prime Ali?
In the heavyweight division, it's hard to pick. The prime Ali is maybe the greatest heavyweight of all time, but most people put Joe Louis number 2 on the list, so I guess I'd have to say Joe Louis. But then again, maybe Frazier, who did beat Muhammad Ali when he was undefeated, granted after his sabbatical, because of the not going into the Vietnam War and being off for 3 or 4 years. Maybe Joe Frazier. Kenny Norton certainly had Muhammad Ali's number in 3 close fights, one of which he, got the decision, another one a lot of people thought he won. As they say, styles make fights. But I guess if you made me pick, I would say probably a Joe Louis.
I'm going to say Mike Tyson in 3 rounds, but he'd have to get it done early. If he could pin Ali early, prime Mike Tyson against a prime Ali would have been an amazing spectacle.
Well, I've thought a lot about Mike Tyson today because I was having a conversation with some of my Twitter followers, just because today happened to be the 32nd anniversary of what was the apex of Iron Mike's career. Today, 32 years ago, is when he knocked Michael Spinks in 91 seconds. And at the time, that Mike Tyson on that night, 32 years ago, today, the day that we're filming this, he might have been able to beat any heavyweight who ever lived. And there was a time at that moment when, leading up to that fight, after that fight, shortly thereafter, the top historians and sports writers that cover boxing and fans were talking about Iron Mike as being maybe the greatest heavyweight who ever lived. Now, he didn't live up to that because of what happened, in the not too distant future after that and the downfall. But that Iron Mike for one night could have beat anybody.
I agree. And that's why I put him in there, even though I think Ali was untouchable when he, had the speed of a middleweight and the footwork of a featherweight almost, the way he moved around. Right. So what's the best fight you've ever seen? And Untouchable says, for me, it has to be Barrera versus Morales 1. What about you, Dan? Wow, I'm going to have to pick my brain while you talk.
I'll do this quickly. We've discussed this before, and I've answered this many times. The best fight I've ever seen and the best fight I ever covered, they're the same, is the first fight for the unified lightweight title, or to unify the titles between Jose Luis Castillo and Diego Corrales,
Yeah.
May 5th, 2005.
Rest in peace, Diego.
2005 at the Mandalay Bay Event Center in Las Vegas. An extraordinary battle. If you never saw it, go on YouTube and watch it. It's not only is it the best fight I ever saw, but even before the 10th round, which is one of the greatest rounds I've ever seen, the first nine rounds already made it like maybe the best fight ever. The 10th round just sent it into the stratosphere when Corrales got off the deck twice from knockdowns where he thought the fight was over, came back and stopped them. It's an extraordinary fight. It was a high skill level. Both guys showed immense heart. An amazing fight.
I'm going to pick the best fight I've ever seen is Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran 1, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago. And I've rewatched it recently, and there's nothing that fight lacks other than knockdowns. And I cannot believe they both stayed on their feet for the entire fight. Because I don't think knockdowns necessarily makes it the best fight you've ever seen. That was an extraordinary night, and I'm picking that. There's so many great fights, so many things fresh in the memory, but I'm going for that 40 years
I'll say
ago.
while you bring up Duran and Leonard, I'll just give a shout out and say thank God that by all accounts, Roberto Duran, who's in the hospital in Panama,
yes,
with
COVID,
is apparently, according to some posts from his children on social media, that the Roberto Sr. is doing well and is okay. But when I saw that, I was like, okay, hopefully he's going to make it, because, I have such a deep, I'm a fan of Roberto Duran, the boxer, but I never covered his career. I've obviously watched zillions of his fights on videos. I've got a whole bunch of DVDs of his fights, but having gotten to meet Duran and gotten to know him a little bit over the years, I absolutely adore him as a human being. He is a wonderful, wonderful man. He is just so fun and so great to be around that I look forward to when I know there's a fight where the promotion will bring him in to make some appearances and to help promote the fight. I look forward to that. I mean, one of the highlights of my career was one afternoon in New York City prior to when Triple G had the unification fight against David Lemieux. The promoters had brought him in to talk about middleweight championship fights. Obviously, Duran had been in some huge middleweight title fights as well as huge fights at Madison Square Garden. And I spent a good part of an afternoon, in the bar at the hotel, myself and our good pal Lance Pugmire, hanging out with Roberto Duran. And one of the gals that worked for Golden Boy Promotions, who was bilingual, she basically acted as the sort of like the United Nations version translator, so she was translating for him in real time. He understands English when you speak it. He just doesn't speak it the greatest.
No.
An incredible conversation.
He spoke English, Dan. He spoke English when he wanted to speak English.
Oh, fair enough. But we were able to go back and forth there. It was just a wonderful time. That's just one of my many memories of being around Duran over the last, 20 years. He's a great guy. I love the guy.
And I'm an absolute admirer of his as well. Prime Naseem Hamed versus a prime Pac-Man. Who wins? I'll go first on this. Naseem Hamed was one of the greatest featherweights of all time. Can be pitched in with anyone as one of the great featherweights. At featherweight against Pac-Man, it would have been an extraordinary fight. But I still think a prime Pac-Man would have knocked Naseem out. Would have been down, but would have knocked Naseem out.
I 100% agree with what you just said. I am a huge Naseem Hamed fan. I got a chance to cover fights when I first started doing this, and I enjoyed being around him. I enjoyed interviewing him. I loved watching his fights. He was tremendous, one of the greatest punchers of all time. I actually found it bizarre that there was people that suggested he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. He belonged in the Hall of Fame. He ultimately got elected. He belongs there. So it's no disrespect to Hamed. Pacquiao is another level all-time great compared to Prince. And I would definitely pick Pacquiao to knock him out as a featherweight. No question in my mind.
Just two more questions this week, Dan, on the questions we're answering. You said that no one in history of boxing could beat a prime Roy Jones Jr. That was you, I think. Does this make him the greatest of all time, better than Sugar Ray Robinson?
I don't think so. My statement was that when Roy Jones was at his
day, yeah,
I didn't think that anybody, or I shouldn't say that.
You were saying at middleweight and super middleweight as well, weren't you?
That I just never seen anybody that freakish in the sense that he could do everything, even though he was a complete mess. But his power, his speed, his intelligence, hand speed and foot speed, by the way.
And his vision.
See everything. Vision. He was just I feel bad because so many people, when they think about Roy Jones, they just think about all those knockout losses he had at the end and how sort of old he looked and not the best shape. And I'm talking about the very last, handful of fights. But at his moment, basically from the beginning of his career all the way through the first fight with Antonio Tarver or through the Ruiz fight, there was nobody like him. He was just an incredible, could do everything. And he compares up there with anybody who ever lived, whether it's Sugar Ray Robinson or it's Sugar Ray Leonard or it's Floyd Mayweather, or, pick a great all-time athlete who could have the skills. Mayweather didn't have the kind of punching power of some of those other guys, but Roy had devastating power as a middleweight, devastating power as a super middleweight, and he carried it up. He scored a number of great knockouts at light heavyweight. Look at the knockout against Virgil Hill, who was in the Hall of Fame. That was an unbelievable one body shot, one of the best shots I ever saw. I just think Roy Jones, is almost criminally underrated at this moment, because some people at this moment in time, when they think about him, they think about only those last handful of fights where he clearly shouldn't have been boxing anymore. And they don't think about the guy, that beat John Ruiz going further back to when he beat and manhandled, a Bernard Hopkins when they were young fighters, manhandled a James Toney at super middleweight, when a lot of people had James Toney at that moment #1 pound for pound, which helped put Roy in that position. And then again, I know Roy, he got the tag of reluctant Roy. He didn't fight all the top guys we could name. He never fought, he never fought Gerald McClellan or Nigel Benn or Stevie Collins and Darius Michalczewski and whatever. But he also fought a lot of guys that were solid in quality. And most of them, even when he fought not so great guys, he destroyed them. Okay, I'm done.
I completely agree with all those things you said. He was a freakish talent. And I just like the point you just made. And what I worry about him is, Dan, he went on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years so long that it will take time when he's completely gone for what the body of work he really achieved to really come to the fore with him as a legend. One of the greatest. I think Sugar Ray Leonard and Sugar Ray Robinson, and he could be put in a list of the top 3 most skilled fighters we've ever seen. Last question today. Is Al Haymon good for boxing, and have either of you ever spoken to Al?
Well, I'll take the second question first. I've talked to Al many times. There was a period, now, we don't have a great relationship today. I really don't have any relationship with Al today. I mean, I've seen him at fights once in a blue moon, and I'll just say hello, and we keep on going. But, in a period of time when he first came into this business in the early 2000s, when he was the manager for Vernon Forrest, which was really his entry into the sport of boxing on the business side, he was involved in boxing from the standpoint that his brother had been a professional boxer, had fought Sugar Ray Leonard. Al feels as though the boxer was his brother had been taken advantage of, which sort of put in his mind that part of why he got into it was to, in his words, to help fighters, which he's helped many fighters in terms of their pay scale and hammering out deals for them. But, back in those days, I used to talk to Al Haymon multiple times a week. I've talked to Al numerous times. And in fact, if you go on Google, I can't say I'm the only one, but I'm pretty sure I may be the only one that's ever quoted Al Haymon in the story who doesn't talk to press. And I've done it twice. He gave me comments when Vernon Forrest signed his multi-fight agreement with HBO after he defeated Sugar Shane Mosley. And also, sadly, a statement for a story after Vernon was shot to death in a very tragic situation. Al was very close to Vernon. That was his first fighter. He loved him like a son. I had a great relationship with Al Haymon. He got sideways with me for something. I'm not going to get into the details that he's wrong about the way he perceives something, but it's, it's kind of water under the bridge. So that kind of ruined our relationship. But the bottom line is he good for boxing? He's probably not good for boxing in many respects, but good for boxing in other respects. And the good thing is he was able to bring back network television in the United States to have major fights on a regular basis because of this deal he has now with Fox. And certainly if you talk to the boxers that he works with, and at one time he had more than 200 fighters under a contract. It's substantially less now, but he's involved with many, many top high-profile fighters. And there's a few over the years, but by and large, I would say probably 95% sing the praises of Al Haymon, who they could have had the opportunity to leave him and do other things. And they are very, very, very loyal. He pays them, in my opinion, and those of many opinions, above market value. So from the boxer standpoint, they're making outstanding money, oftentimes for not that tough of a fight, to be quite honest. So from that perspective, he's good for the boxer, sure, that he works with. And he has done some good things for boxing, as I mentioned, with the network TV deal. But there are those detractors that would say maybe he hasn't been so great for boxing because he completely tried to upend the business and the sport when he bought time on everything. And he tried to put other promoters out of business, squatted on dates, and did a lot of things that were perceived as very unsavory. And on top of that, let's be honest, and he's not the only one to do this, so I'm not laying it all at his feet. Because of his involvement with certain fighters, actively prevented fights that fans wanted to see from taking place. So I can't say, it's all good or it's all bad. It's somewhere a gray area in the middle. So there's definitely good things about him in terms of the boxing business, and certainly things that I would perceive as negative to the business.
Well, thank you for that very fulsome answer, Dan. I think he's very good for the business. I think it's good to have 3 major promoters in the US. I'd like to see more. I think if there were 4 or 5, it would be even better. I know you'll disagree on that because then fights wouldn't get made. But I think
he argues he's not a promoter, though. That's the thing also.
Yeah, but he's not. But he's an advisor, isn't he? But he's a quasi promoter. I mean, because
he calls the shots.
He can't be.
He calls the shots.
Yeah, exactly. So I've never interviewed him. I know that he's a fan of my work. He's often in touch.
Have you talked to him?
No, I don't speak. He doesn't do interviews, but he's got.
No, I don't mean an interview. But have you ever talked to him in private? I mean, when I was talking,
no, I don't know, because the period I've been dealing with his fighters, and let's be honest, PBC has not been around that long.
5 years.
Yeah, but that period, he stepped away and he's become a silent partner to it in terms of speaking with people. I don't think there's anyone in the UK other than the promoters that speak to Al Hamed. I know I get messages from his people. I know all his people, so I don't need to, I know the way it works. I know, like, if I speak about Deontay Wilder, I'll speak to Jay Diaz, I'll speak to Shelley Finkel, I'll speak to Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, whoever it might be, Tyson Fury. It doesn't matter. I don't need him. Because
I'm not talking about whether you're going to
deals,
I'm not talking about quoting him in a story or hitting him up for some news, or some.
No, he's not a friend of mine in the industry. I don't know him.
Right. So again,
nor do I. And if you're listening, Al, I will take a call from you. It's fine. But he's got other people who he delegates that to now.
Right. But I'm saying I don't talk to him anymore either, or vice versa. I mean, I would like to. I have nothing against the guy, but for a period of time that went on for several years, we had developed a relationship where it wasn't for purposes of like quoting him in stories and that sort of stuff, but I spoke to him on a regular basis. And I have to say,
you're the reason he doesn't speak to journos anymore. You're the reason you upset him.
He can be.
You upset him, and he does not talk to journalists.
He can be a very, very likable guy. He can be very charming. He's smart as a whip. And
listen, he was an impresario in the music industry, wasn't
absolutely.
he? People don't know that. I mean, I know Al's history. I've done massive profiles on him. I got an email back saying you love the profile you wrote, and blah blah blah. But the bottom line is, he doesn't do shit anymore with us. End of. Doesn't matter. Is he good for boxing? Yes, he is. Anyone on that level who does things, as Dan was mentioning, there were times when he was cock blocking the industry, if I can put it that way, and it wasn't productive. But that's gone now. That's gone. So it's good. Listen, I'm going to finish my sausages and my bagels for dinner. What's for dinner, Dan?
I have no idea.
Rubbish.
Not a clue. My wife and son are out. My son is doing some ice skating today. And when they get back, we'll figure out what the dinner plan is.
And listen, I do love every acre of you, and it's always a pleasure.
I love every acre of you too, Gareth.
Cheers, man. It's great. We'll see you next time.
All right, buddy.